Bienvenidos, bienvenidas, welcome everyone. Vamos a pedir que os podáis apagar el micrófono. Tenemos el honor fantástico, maravilloso de tener a Ken Gergen con nosotros. Él fue un inspirador que inspiró a David Cooper Ryder a crear la indagación apreciativa, pero que ha inspirado a muchísimas personas. Y ahora voy a hablar en inglés, así que por favor, quien no entienda inglés, que elija interpretación español. So welcome, Ken. We are very, very happy that you are here. We are expecting more people, but in honor of punctuality, we are going to start. We have several people today that are from the world of education. We have also several consultants, business consultants, and we have some teachers and coaches. So we have a nice variety. And we are very happy to have you here with us. So please, you can start. We are recording, and the floor is yours, Ken.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Miriam. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I'm humbled that you're coming from such different points of the world. It's just wonderful to have this technology to bring us together. I will try to talk slowly because I realize that most of you, this is a second language, and Miriam will be translating, and I will try to be kind to her. At any rate, yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. I want to talk about a topic that is rather new on the scene, but to do that, I need to generate a background. Specifically, I have to talk for a few minutes about two major movements in the social sciences, which have been extremely important in terms of their applications for all the professions that are represented here. Education, organization, coaching, counseling, and on, government even. But these are terrifically important movements, and you have to understand them as the background before I get to the problem or challenge of scaffolds. Now, the first of these is some decades ago. Some of you will recognize it. Essentially, a movement in the sciences, but particularly the social, from an orientation in which the words that we use were supposed to copy or represent facts in the world. So that if this was a fact in the world, my word might be pen. All right. So I look at the world and give it a label. Now that's the general idea in science. We encounter the world as it is, and our words become maps or good pictures of that world. That has been guided the social sciences, the idea of truth, the idea of knowledge. Now, the major change that took place, and controversial, and it's still in motion, is to reverse the relationship between word and world. To say it's not looking at the world and making a word for it. It is to say that however we name the world comes out of our relationships. And that then we seize or find something in the world that we name that. That is, we begin with our values, with our relationships, with our life ways, and out of that set of life ways with each other, we come to name the world. Let me give you an. I'll take a classroom, and you'll have a student who is very active. Now, that's nothing special about that until that activity interferes with the class or with that student paying attention or doing well in class. The movement deserves nothing. We all move. But when that movement makes trouble for us, then we select out something, namely the student, and say, attention deficit or hyperactivity. That is a mental problem. Now realize that they've selected the student as the problem. It could be otherwise. You could select the teacher. You could select the curriculum. But the student becomes the selected out as the object and given a name. And that name, which now is part of the vocabulary of mental illness or disorder, becomes something to treat. It's not because there is mental illness in the world and we need to name it. It's because something bothers us and we select something to give it a name. All right. Now, this is the basis for basically all of social constructionist theory. Many of you know this from other venues.
So, Ken, if I understand well what you're saying, if a student or a young person behaves in a way that bothers us, we name it as a mental illness or as a problem, but this is a social construction.
Perfect.
Good.
Now, what that idea has done for a lot of people is to move our attention to language and how we name things, because in the naming, we create our world together. Many of you will know this, for example, from narrative therapy. That is, when I tell something about my life, it is a story. It is a way of naming me. It could be told differently because my life does not demand one story. So if I'm having a problem, it's not so much changing my life, it's changing the story or the narrative in such a way that now I understand differently and I can behave differently. So reconstructing, reformulating. My wife and I did, for example, a newsletter for 20 years on positive aging. The idea that we understand aging in our tradition as going downhill, as now I'm in decline.
So you mean envejecer positivamente? No, I just got a look on the Pep is translating, so it's envejecer positivamente. Okay, yeah, go on. Positive aging.
Are we all right?
Yes. Right.
So we can reconstruct aging not as decline, but as an opportunity for growth. That here is a period in which the world can open up for us in new ways. It makes a huge difference, in fact, in your lifespan, if you look at aging as decline and I'm getting worse each day, as opposed to an optimistic opening. What I'm trying to say here is that with this shift in the social sciences, from a realist to a constructionist orientation, language becomes tremendously important. How we use it, how we name things, and how we can change the names and live differently. Okay, that's the first big movement. Now, I can go back to this. It's a huge topic. There's a whole book I have written on this topic, but today this is just the beginning. Now, the second movement was to say, okay, there's language, but where does it come from? Yeah, it comes out of my head when I talk, but I didn't make it up. It's not mine, and it's not yours. Language emerges only from a coordination among us. It is a collective byproduct. It is we together make language. So this is a really important shift because Western history and tradition usually places the center of logic and significance on the single individual. Western tradition is by and large individual-centered. Individual reason, individual spirit, individual motivation, and so on. But when you realize that language is essentially a relationship, which means that everything I say is only because of us. Everything that makes sense is only because of us. It begins to shift the concern from the individual to the relationship. We become much more interested in coordination and dialogue, in the co-creation of our reality. Now, that shift you also will recognize. When that shift was made, appreciative inquiry came into life. Because here was a case where it focused on language, but it focused on how it came to be that we could talk in a certain way. Realizing that if we talk about our problems, the problems become heavier and heavier. That becomes our reality. So we shift the direction of how we talk together. We are invited into a talk about what we value, what we care about, how we could build the future on that. What appreciative inquiry does is to arrange the form of coordination. That is, it creates a form of dialogue, particular form of dialogue. Now, this is tremendously important because it means that if you could create the form of dialogue, you can create different outcomes. Design the dialogue for specific purposes. This becomes the basis of our whole movement toward dialogic organizational development. Saying, if you want to change the organization, look to the forms of dialogue, because you can arrange and generate a particular kind of dialogue out of which you can create optimism, you can create a sense of positive future. The whole movement towards creativity by design, huge movement now. How you can generate creativity by designing a dialogue which generates creativity. Now continues to be an enormously important movement. The designing of dialogue, moving from language to the making of language. Now, if you understand that, you're prepared to go in the direction I want to explore today. We can design dialogue, but after all, we live in a world in which the groundwork has been prepared for us to talk or have certain kinds of dialogues and not others. We have traditions, we have technologies, we have spaces which invite us to speak in certain ways and not others. I mean, if you go to a birthday party, there will be certain kinds of ways you will talk, and they will usually be lighthearted. You won't be angry with each other. It'll be festive. It's a different way of talking than if you're attending a funeral. You'll have a different kind of conversation. These are traditions, and they are like building, they are scaffolds or preparations for the way we talk. And we don't even think about them. That's the way we do it. But they're tremendously important. If I have a political election in my country, on our television, we will have debates. And the candidates in those debates will find fault with each other. They will show the other person is weak, not thinking well, is motivated badly. They will find every flaw in the other. And we just accept that. Debates are like that. But think of the consequences. Already you've created the grounds for alienation, for hostility in the public at large. Prepare a debate, and you prepare the grounds for alienation and hostility. What if it were, and we just accept that. What if it were not a debate? What if it were a collaboration in which the parties said, what would we like to do together that would be useful? Totally different outcome. So the scaffolds that we accept, we need to examine them and ask, why do we do it this way? Could it be done otherwise? Because some of these are killing us. I'm going to talk for a little bit about education, because it's been of special significance to me. We all realize that educational systems of today are not preparing us for the future at hand. We have a world of rapid change where we need to have people to collaborate. We need them to understand each other, to draw together, to co-create. It's a world in which we face pandemics, we face international terrorism, conflict, an environment which is out of control, and simply learning old curricula, and each individual learning old curricula does not prepare us for that world. Now we know that, but the schools are scaffolded in a different way. Let me say a little more. Those kinds of learnings, that is, the learning of how to continue to learn, because the movement requires a continuous education. Any one of us has had to stay in a profession, has got to be under continuous learning. increasingly, we need to work with each other. We need to know each other's ideas. We need to collaborate. Now, realize that those are relational process. That is, those are ways of relating to each other. They're ways of listening to each other, appreciating points of view, being able to be humble about one's point of view. They require a lot of skills to do those things. They require relationships in which you create value, that this is important and we must do it together. All value, what we are enthusiastic about, comes out of our relationships. So now let's look at the structure of education. Why doesn't it facilitate these ends? That structure is basically built like a factory for mass production. It's a hierarchy, principal over teachers, over students, each in charge of the other. Principal evaluating teachers, evaluating students. It's also a hierarchy in which the school is now underneath government. Government determines curriculum, student teaching requirements, and so on. The schools are evaluated or assessed for doing that well. So it's a giant hierarchy, as you would find in a factory, from the CEO down to the products, with the students are simply products of the system. And to have products, you have to have quality control, which are examinations, tests, national tests, and so on, which requires a standardized curriculum. As testing and standardization go hand in hand. So what do you have? A system in which each person is evaluated by someone above, and students are simply products, like raw material to be put into the system to stamp, and created like good sausages. Students have no motivation for this because there's no relationship in which you can create value. Rather, students are set against each other. It is a competition. Many of those students will drop out because that competition creates them as failures. If they don't reach the standards, they become rightfully speaking, I don't belong here. I hate this. I'll drop out. And it's a big problem with student dropout, not finishing school. Huge number come out feeling I'm just average. I have no special qualities. And some will come out feeling superior to everyone else. The student, because they're evaluated, the relationship between the student and the teacher changes to the student becomes an object to be produced. The student worries about their family because they become an object then to be, their future depends on good grades. And I don't know how it is in Latin America or Spain, but we in the United States have a huge problem with student mental health, depression, anxiety. 1/10 of our students' body now in the United States, roughly, is taking some kind of pill, some kind of chemical, anti-anxiety drug for attention deficit or depression. So what we have is a scaffolding for alienation from top to bottom, for a sense of I live in my world alone. I have to be careful about myself, my future. I'm talking about principals, teachers, and students. I have to look out for myself. So I'm not prepared for dialogue. I'm not prepared to collaborate. And it's a scaffold for basically failure of the future. Now, most of us who are in education know there are ways, there are pedagogies available. We have project-based learning, which is valuable for the future. We have collaborative learning. We have dialogic classrooms. But all those pedagogies do not flourish because of evaluation, because of assessment. You can't grade them. Well, with a colleague, Chateau Gill in the UK, we wrote a book on Beyond the Tyranny of Testing, trying to point out a whole range of evaluation processes that are not testing, who do not put people in hierarchies, which are more collaborative and dialogic. Because once those are installed, once you have ways of testing which are collaborative, which are caring, and there are some, it opens up the possibility of pedagogies in which there is also collaboration, in which there are projects, in which there is dialogue, and so on. So that's one way of doing it, is trying to focus on the eliminating that this tyranny of the testing, which really spoils the system. I also want to talk here about a school I've worked with in Norway, because they have gone further. And I've worked with them for a number of years now, and I've been very excited about what has happened there. This is a school for dropouts, for that 20 to 30% who do not finish their education, who are often they're alienated from their families. Some of them live on the streets, some of them drugs, some have mental problems. It's a school for those kids. What they have done is, first of all, we don't do grades. We do dialogues with each other. Right? In classrooms, if students make a presentation, the other children, this is youth now, we're talking about largely from 12 to 17 years of age. The students in the room have cards. They're called strength cards. They might say interesting or fascinating or well-designed, or there'll be some positive statement, something I enjoyed it, or at the end of the class, they can give these cards to the student. So typically a student, after they've presented something, others will come up and give that student cards. It's like feedback. Yeah, we like that. The hierarchy of the school changes, so that at the beginning of the semester and during the year, the students and teachers meet together to generate school policy. So we together talk about where we're headed, what we like, what works. Typically, they'll do appreciative inquiry a couple of times during the year to check in with each other. They don't have teachers and students. They have young learning colleagues and older learning colleagues, because we are all learning together. This school called Youth Invest has been so effective in drawing kids into it, who love it, who stay there, who stay in the system, that there are now, I think, 5 or 6 duplicates of the school, and it has become a focus of national attention, with the idea that this kind of school really needs to be expanded as part of the system, as a major part of the system. And my hope is that those very kinds of implements, those sorts of practices of we together, would become part of public schooling. Why not? I want to say one more thing, because it related to a number of you here. That kind of structure that is so damaging of education is also one that we inherit in most of our organizations. Most of our organizations are built like machines, with each person doing their job and evaluated in some way. So we're taught to do our specific job, to be evaluated, and if each person does what they should do, the machine works. So there's little attention to the dialogic process, how we work together. There's basically a concern for self, so I don't necessarily tell you everything. I still tell you mostly things that benefit me, and I'm paid pretty much to do my work, so there's not much curiosity or creativity. That machine of the organization is generally based on a product, what we produce. And with the changing world, you need an organization which also is rapidly and capable of adjustment, innovation, and creativity. It requires a sense of dialogic relationship, of we together. So the question is how to change the structure, that scaffold of relationships, so that it could do that. What would we need to do to change that scaffold? How could you change leadership, for example, that it becomes far more relational centered, of not I as leader, but I with you. So relationships among people are far more open. I've worked with another organization in Finland. They have changed the assessment, performance review, to a collaborative assessment. So I don't evaluate you as lower than me. We come together and ask ourselves, how are we doing? How is this relationship working? What do we do well? What can we do better? So performance review becomes a positive sharing, a sense of we belong together, and a far more flexible sense of what is possible emerges. So perhaps that's enough background. I'm open to discussion, to elaboration, to questions, and I hope Miriam can help me in this communication. But thank you for your patience.
Thank you so much, Ken. And we're going to now enter into question and answer. So I will stop this recording first.